The glass facade of Pinnacle Dynamics glistened under the morning sun, its towering frame casting long shadows over the busy street below. Inside, the top floor buzzed with a rare kind of energy, anticipation. Employees gathered in the executive lounge, where the long mahogany table was set with fresh flowers, pastries, and polished silver trays of coffee cups. In the center of it all stood Harper Lewis, the company's lead systems architect, her neatly tailored navy suit reflecting the same meticulous precision that defined her work. Today was more than just another quarterly briefing. It was a celebration. Harper's revolutionary project management system, launched barely a year ago, had boosted Pinnacle Dynamics' revenue by an unprecedented 300%. Investors were calling it a market miracle, clients were praising its efficiency, and rival companies were scrambling to replicate what she had built. Ethan Cole, the CEO, stepped into the lounge with his signature confident stride. His dark charcoal suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, his smile broad and polished for the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice filling the room, "today we celebrate not just numbers, but the mind behind those numbers." He gestured toward Harper with an open palm. "This woman's brilliance has redefined how we do business. Harper, you are, without a doubt, the golden asset of Pinnacle Dynamics." Applause erupted. Cameras clicked. Harper smiled politely, shaking hands as colleagues congratulated her. Yet beneath Ethan's glowing praise, there was a flicker in his eyes, an almost imperceptible tightness around his jaw. To everyone else, it looked like admiration. To Harper, it felt like a calculation. As the celebration carried on, Ethan stood beside her for the official photos, his arm hovering just close enough to suggest camaraderie without touching. "You've outdone yourself," he said through a smile meant for the cameras. His tone, however, was clipped, controlled. Harper caught it instantly. She had spent enough time in corporate boardrooms to know when praise was genuine and when it was a strategic move. After the speeches, the crowd began to disperse. Ethan led Harper into the adjoining boardroom, where the panoramic view of the city made the office look like it floated above the world. He poured 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to her. "You've made us unstoppable," he said, leaning casually against the table. "Everyone's talking about Pinnacle Dynamics, and it's all because of you." Harper thanked him, choosing her words carefully. "It's a team effort, but yes, I'm proud of what we've accomplished." Ethan's smile lingered, but his eyes sharpened. "I hope you understand, Harper, that in this business, success attracts attention. Not all of it friendly. You've made waves, big ones, and big waves can capsize boats if they're not controlled." It was a strange choice of words for a day of celebration, and Harper noted it, tucking it away in the mental file she kept for moments that didn't feel right. Still, she clinked her glass against his, masking her unease. "Then I suppose it's a good thing we're on the same boat," she replied. Ethan chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course." The rest of the day was filled with congratulatory emails, calls from investors, and a company-wide announcement hailing Harper as the architect of Pinnacle's new era. Yet, as she packed her things to leave, Harper glanced back at the lounge where the celebration had taken place. Through the glass wall, she caught a glimpse of Ethan speaking in low tones to Maya Brooks, her former mentee and now the operations manager. Their heads were bent close together, their expressions serious. When Ethan noticed Harper watching, his smile returned instantly, lifting a hand in casual farewell. Harper smiled back, but the warmth had faded. She knew office politics well enough to recognize when something was brewing. Today, she was the golden asset, untouchable, indispensable. But the corporate world had a way of turning its heroes into scapegoats the moment it became profitable. As she stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, she couldn't shake the faint, inexplicable chill crawling up her spine. Somewhere behind the applause and champagne toasts, she sensed a shift, a quiet, deliberate calculation already in motion. For now, she let it go. Tomorrow would be another day. But in the depths of her mind, a single thought took root. In a place where loyalty was negotiable, being the golden asset could also mean being the prime target. The next morning, Harper arrived at Pinnacle Dynamics earlier than usual. The city was still waking, the streets damp from an overnight drizzle, and the building's lobby lights cast a sterile glow on the marble floors. She intended to spend the first hour reviewing a new analytics module for her system, a quiet start before the usual storm of calls and emails. But before she could settle at her desk, her phone vibrated. It was an internal message from the executive assistant. Urgent board meeting. 9 a.m. Attendance mandatory. There was no agenda attached, which was unusual. Harper frowned. Board meetings were planned weeks in advance, not called with less than an hour's notice. At 8:55, she walked into the boardroom. The panoramic windows were shrouded by half-drawn blinds, muting the morning light. Around the long table sat every member of the board, their expressions neutral and unreadable. Ethan Cole was at the head, flanked by Maya Brooks on one side and the CFO, Gregory Hale, on the other. A faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingered, but no one touched their cups. "Harper," Ethan greeted, his tone brisk. "Please, have a seat." She took a chair halfway down the table, glancing around. No smiles, no small talk. A tension hung in the air, thick enough to taste. Her mind ran through possibilities. Budget cuts? A merger? None of them explained the odd, almost predatory stillness in the room. Ethan steepled his fingers, leaning forward. "I'll be direct," he said. "Serious concerns have been raised regarding the integrity of our data management practices, specifically within your system." The words hit her like cold water. "Concerns?" she echoed. "What concerns?" "Everything we've built is compliant with every regulation." Gregory slid a file across the table toward her. "We've received reports," he said, "that certain client data may have been accessed without proper authorization." Harper opened the file. Inside were printouts, selective excerpts from server logs, stripped of context, designed to mislead anyone who didn't understand the architecture. Her pulse quickened. "This is manipulated," she said firmly. "Those entries are routine internal diagnostics. We run them to detect system vulnerabilities. Every action is logged, documented, and approved." Ethan's face remained composed. "And yet, Harper, perception matters as much as reality. The board has determined that this situation could harm our reputation if it were to leak. We cannot take that risk." Harper looked to Maya for support, but Maya's gaze stayed fixed on the table, her hands clasped tightly together. "The betrayal was silent, but it was absolute. I've dedicated years to building this," Harper said, her voice low but steady. "You all know exactly what's going on here. Someone's setting me up, and you're letting it happen." Ethan exhaled through his nose as if this was an unpleasant but necessary task. "Harper Lewis, effective immediately, your employment with Pinnacle Dynamics is terminated. You will be escorted from the premises today. Security will retrieve your personal items." For a moment, she didn't move. Her mind flickered through every late night, every early morning, every line of code written in service of this company, and now it was all being erased with a single sentence. She stood slowly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "I hope you understand," she said, scanning the faces around the table, "that you're not just firing me. You're taking something you don't fully understand. And when it breaks, and it will, you won't know how to fix it." Ethan's expression didn't change. "We'll take our chances." Without another word, Harper turned toward the door. As she walked out, she caught one last glimpse of Maya, still avoiding her eyes, jaw tight, guilt flickering just enough to be seen. The elevator ride down was silent, except for the faint hum of cables. Harper's reflection in the mirrored wall stared back at her, composed but burning inside. They thought this was the end. They had no idea it was only the beginning. The silent goodbye with a progressive developing plot, deeper event description, and no subchapters, keeping the tension building from the last scene. Chapter 3, The Silent Goodbye. Two uniformed security officers waited outside the boardroom door, their posture stiff and professional, their eyes politely blank. Harper stepped into the hallway between them, her heels clicking against the polished floor as they walked her toward her office. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the hushed corridor, like each step marked the stripping away of the years she had given to Pinnacle Dynamics. When they reached her glass-walled office, the news had already traveled. People stood at their desks, pretending to be busy while their eyes tracked her every move. Some faces showed genuine shock and unease, others a thinly veiled satisfaction, as though they had been waiting for the moment the company's star would fall. Inside her office, one of the guards handed her a cardboard box. "For your personal belongings," he said quietly. She nodded, setting it on her desk. The air in the room felt different now, thinner, colder. The system schematics she had pinned to the wall seemed almost like a betrayal, as if they belonged to the enemy now. She moved methodically, placing framed photos, her leather-bound notebook, and the small potted plant from her windowsill into the box. Each item was a fragment of her life here. Late nights coding, working through lunch breaks, fielding frantic calls from project managers. The plant had been a gift from her assistant 2 years ago, a good luck charm for the system's launch. Now it was leaving with her, its green leaves still vibrant in contrast to the sterile gray of the office. Outside her door, the tension thickened. A few brave colleagues approached under the watchful eyes of security. Marcus from the analytics team stepped forward first. "This isn't right," he murmured, his jaw tight. "We all know you didn't do what they're saying." Harper gave him a small, grateful smile. "Take care of yourself, Marcus." She didn't dare say more. In this building, even sympathy could be seen as dissent. Then there was Rachel, who had been part of her development team from day one. Her eyes glistened. "If you need anything," she began, but stopped when she noticed Maya Brooks standing near the break room, arms folded, gaze averted. Rachel's expression hardened. She nodded once to Harper and stepped back. The rest of the faces were harder to read. Some looked relieved, as if a shadow had lifted from their own ambitions. Others simply watched, detached, like spectators at an execution. With her belongings packed, Harper walked toward the lobby, and there he was, Ethan Cole, leaning casually against the reception desk, a picture of calm authority. He extended his hand. "Harper," he said in that smooth, PR-perfect tone, "I wish you the best in your future endeavors." She took his hand, feeling the calculated chill of his grip. His palm was warm, but his fingers were cold, lifeless. "I'm sure you do," she replied evenly. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. In Ethan's gaze, she saw not just the satisfaction of removing a potential rival, but the self-assured belief that he had already won. In hers, there was no visible anger, only a stillness he wouldn't recognize as the warning it truly was. The security team escorted her through the glass doors into the open air. The city stretched out before her, the hum of traffic and distant honking oddly comforting after the sterile, controlled environment she was leaving behind. The drizzle had returned, speckling her navy suit with faint, dark spots. She didn't run for cover. She let the rain touch her, grounding her in the moment. As the revolving door spun behind her, she heard it close with a soft whoosh, sealing off the life she'd built inside. To everyone in that building, Harper Lewis had just been erased. But as she walked down the wet pavement, gripping the box of her belongings, she allowed herself the smallest curl of a smile. Ethan might think he had severed her from Pinnacle Dynamics. What he didn't know was that the company's heart still beat because of the code she had written, and without her, that heartbeat would begin to falter. This wasn't the end. It was the moment the game truly began. The rain had stopped by the time Harper reached her apartment, but the clouds lingered low over the city, turning the afternoon into a dim, muted gray. She set the cardboard box of her belongings on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, letting the silence wrap around her. The quiet was deceptive. It wasn't peace, but the stillness of a battlefield before the first move is made. Her apartment was small, modern, and meticulously kept, a reflection of the same precision she applied to her work. But now, the space felt different, charged with purpose. She took off her heels, placed them neatly by the door, and moved toward the small home office tucked into the corner of her living room. The glow of her personal workstation was already waiting. 3 high-resolution monitors, a custom-built CPU she had assembled herself, and a private encrypted network no one at Pinnacle Dynamics had access to. Harper sat down, her fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment. She could still see Ethan's smug smile in her mind, the cold handshake, the certainty in his eyes that he had shut her out. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself, then began to type. The integrity protocol was buried deep within the core of her project management system. Officially, it was undocumented. In truth, it was her insurance policy, a set of conditional triggers designed not to destroy, but to degrade. It was the kind of sabotage invisible to anyone who didn't understand the architecture as intimately as she did. She navigated to her private sandbox environment, a shadow copy of the live system that mirrored every update in real time. Accessing it required a layered authentication sequence, an obsolete login key only she still possessed, a biometric scan, and a passphrase in an old programming language no one at the company even knew she'd studied. When the system recognized her, the code unfolded on the screen like a familiar map. Her eyes traced the lines until she reached the dormant sequence she had hidden years ago, disguised as a harmless maintenance subroutine. She began to modify it, delicately, surgically. The adjustments were small but deliberate, a slight delay in data synchronization between departments. A rare but recurring mismatch in client invoice totals, a gradual increase in the time it took for analytics reports to generate. Nothing so catastrophic it would point directly to sabotage, but enough to seed doubt. Clients would complain, support tickets would pile up, deadlines would start slipping. The perfect death wasn't an explosion. It was rot, slow, and undeniable. Harper leaned back, rereading the sequence. It was elegant in its subtlety. The integrity protocol would activate in staggered phases, each issue appearing unrelated to the others. Even if the IT team caught one, they would never suspect the web of issues was connected or that they were intentional. Before deploying it, she hesitated for just a moment, fingers poised over the enter key. Once she triggered it, there would be no going back unless she intervened herself. But then she thought of Maya's averted eyes in the boardroom, of Gregory sliding that doctored file toward her, of Ethan's calculated handshake in the lobby. They had turned her into the villain in their story. Now, she would rewrite the ending. With a single keystroke, the protocol went live. The monitors flickered for a second as the changes propagated. Somewhere across the city, in Pinnacle Dynamics' gleaming headquarters, the first tiny seeds of instability had just been planted in the heart of their empire. Harper closed the terminal, locking the system behind multiple layers of encryption. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city skyline. From here, the office tower was just another glinting rectangle in the distance. Inside, Ethan was probably still celebrating his victory. He couldn't know, that the countdown had already started. She poured herself a glass of wine and settled into the couch, her expression unreadable. She wasn't going to rush this. The most satisfying revenge was the kind that unfolded slowly, giving the guilty just enough time to believe they were still in control before it all slipped away. By the time the first complaints reached the executive floor, Harper would be nothing but a ghost in their system, untraceable, untouchable, and smiling in the shadows. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. On Monday morning, the operations team reported a delay in generating a critical analytics report for one of Pinnacle Dynamics' biggest clients. The IT department chalked it up to server lag. By Tuesday, a second client complained about mismatched invoice totals, numbers not adding up despite being pulled directly from the system. That afternoon, a project manager emailed Ethan directly, warning that 2 high-priority deadlines were in jeopardy because task tracking had inexplicably slowed to a crawl. Inside the towering glass headquarters, the rhythm of work began to fracture. Employees muttered in hallways, glancing at their screens as if waiting for them to freeze again. Support tickets multiplied, each one describing a different issue. Documents not syncing, project timelines suddenly shifting, client data requiring manual verification. Individually, the problems seemed like everyday glitches. Together, they formed a pattern no one yet recognized. Ethan Cole, however, refused to acknowledge that anything systemic was wrong. In the executive meeting that Wednesday, he waved off the growing complaints with a flick of his hand. "These are isolated incidents," he said, pacing at the head of the table. "We've expanded fast. Scaling always comes with a few bumps. That's what we pay middle management to handle." His gaze landed sharply on department heads, making it clear where the blame would fall. Gregory Hale, the CFO, nodded in agreement, eager to redirect investor concerns elsewhere. But Maya Brooks, sitting 2 seats down from Ethan, kept her head lowered, scribbling notes she didn't need to take. She was the one dealing with the fallout directly, fielding calls from furious project leads, trying to coordinate fixes with an IT team stretched to its limits. At night, long after the building's lights dimmed, Maya stayed in her office, eyes burning from staring at lines of code she only partially understood. Harper's absence was a void she couldn't fill, no matter how many hours she worked. Every time she thought she'd solved an issue, another would surface in a completely different part of the system. It was like chasing shadows that slipped through her fingers. By Friday, the cracks widened. A major European client threatened to pull their contract unless their project was restored to schedule within the week. Investor calls grew tense. In a video conference, one shareholder bluntly asked Ethan if they had fired the wrong person. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he answered smoothly, "Our systems are solid. This is a matter of internal discipline, and I'm addressing it." The truth was, his confidence had begun to erode. Late that night, when most of the building was dark, Ethan stood alone in the boardroom, staring out at the glittering skyline. He thought about Harper, how unshakable she'd been, how she always seemed to anticipate problems before they even appeared. He told himself her absence wasn't the cause of this spiral, but the thought crept in anyway. Across the city, Harper was fully aware of the chaos. From her apartment, she monitored public-facing performance metrics through industry dashboards and client chatter on private business forums. She didn't need direct access to see the results of her protocol. The numbers were slipping in exactly the way she designed, slow enough to be blamed on incompetence, fast enough to start panicking those who depended on flawless delivery. She sipped her coffee, scrolling through a thread where mid-level employees anonymously vented about the unfixable glitches. One post caught her attention. "Feels like the system's fighting us. You fix one thing, 2 more break." Harper's lips curved into a subtle smile. They were beginning to notice the pattern, just not the hand behind it. By the end of the week, The empire was still standing, but the surface polish had dulled. The first hairline fractures were visible to anyone looking closely. And Harper knew, with absolute certainty, that the deeper breaks were still to come. The first contract termination arrived on a Monday morning, an email marked urgent from one of Pinnacle Dynamics' largest international clients. The language was formal but cutting, citing persistent operational failures and erosion of trust in system reliability as reasons for withdrawing their business. Ethan read it twice, jaw clenching tighter each time. Losing this client wasn't just a blow to revenue, it was a signal to the market that something was deeply wrong inside Pinnacle. By Tuesday, another client followed, this time a major tech consortium that had publicly praised the company just months before. Their withdrawal was announced in a press release, and within an hour, business news outlets were running headlines about Pinnacle Dynamics' sudden client exodus. The company's pristine reputation was starting to crumble in plain view. The stock market reacted immediately. Shares fell by 5% before lunch, another 4% by the closing bell. Traders whispered about instability. Analysts who once hailed Pinnacle as a market leader now questioned its sustainability. Ethan called an emergency investor meeting for Wednesday morning, determined to project control. The conference room was filled with the low murmur of voices and the faint glow of laptop screens as investors and board members gathered. Ethan entered with his usual smooth stride, but the faint tightness around his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. He launched into a presentation heavy with charts and projections, carefully framing the situation as a temporary setback caused by overly cautious clients and correctable technical hiccups. But the investors weren't buying it. An older shareholder, known for his bluntness, leaned forward. Ethan, we've all seen the numbers. This isn't a hiccup. Contracts are collapsing. Your revenue projections are fantasy at this point. Another voice cut in, sharper. What happened to the woman who built this system? Harper Lewis. I hear her name more in the client exit interviews than yours. You dismissed her, and now we're bleeding. Was that wise? Ethan's confident tone faltered for the first time. Harper's departure was in the best interest of the company. Our team is more than capable of. Capable? The shareholder interrupted. Capable of losing 2 of our biggest accounts in a week? Capable of tanking our share price? The room fell into a heavy silence. Ethan felt the ground shift under him. This was no longer a matter of managing perception. This was survival. By Thursday, the whispers had begun. Employees spoke in hushed tones in the elevators, passing along rumors about potential buyers circling the company. Words like merger, acquisition, and hostile takeover floated through the halls. Some claimed to have overheard board members discussing offers behind closed doors. Maya Brooks, drowning in unresolved system issues, avoided Ethan whenever possible. She had started to notice the way people looked at her, some with sympathy, others with blame. The endless nights spent trying to patch glitches were taking a toll, dark circles forming under her eyes. And still, the problems kept multiplying, as if the system itself refused to be tamed. That Friday, when the share price dropped another 6%, Ethan found himself alone in his office after midnight. The skyline stretched beyond the glass, but all he saw was the reflection of a man no longer in control. His tie hung loose, his cufflinks abandoned on the desk. For the first time in years, he felt the cold edge of real fear. Across the city, Harper watched the same headlines he did, her apartment bathed in the warm light of her desk lamp. She read the investor statements, the market analyses, the speculation about leadership changes. The plan was unfolding exactly as she'd intended, slow enough to avoid suspicion, but fast enough to be irreversible. She closed her laptop, leaned back, and allowed herself a quiet satisfaction. Ethan's facade was cracking, and soon the whole structure would come down. The call came late in the evening, long after the city's skyline had settled into its rhythm of glowing windows and muted streetlights. Harper was in her kitchen, a saucepan simmering gently on the stove, when her phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. She almost let it go to voicemail, until she saw the small corporate ID tag beneath the digits. Pinnacle Dynamics. For a moment, she just stood there, watching the screen vibrate in her hand. Then she swiped to answer, bringing it slowly to her ear. Harper. Ethan's voice came through, lower than she remembered, the usual crisp confidence dulled by fatigue. There was no preamble, no rehearsed charm. We need to talk. She didn't move from where she stood. I can't imagine what we'd have to talk about, Ethan. A pause. She could almost hear him recalibrating. I'll be direct. The board is concerned. Our clients are losing faith. The system is... He stopped himself, choosing another phrase. Performing below expectations. You know it better than anyone. I'm prepared to offer you double your previous salary to come back. Harper leaned against the counter, letting the silence stretch. She could picture him in his office, tie loosened, the lights dim except for the desk lamp, waiting for her to jump at the offer. That was how it worked for him. You took a beating, then came crawling back when he extended a hand. Double my salary, she repeated evenly. That's generous. Almost makes it sound like you regret something. It's not about regret, he replied quickly, too quickly. It's about the future. We can fix this together. Whatever happened before, we can move past it. She laughed softly, not from amusement, but from the sheer audacity of it. Whatever happened before? You mean when you dragged me into a boardroom, accused me of breaching ethics, and had security walk me out? You mean when you took my work, gutted my role, and handed it to people who didn't even understand how it functioned? Ethan exhaled, the sound tight. Harper, I'm offering you a chance to? No, she cut in, her voice sharp but calm. You're offering me a chance to clean up your mess. You fired me to steal my work, Ethan. Now you own the consequences. For a moment, there was only the faint hiss of the phone line. She imagined him gripping the handset a little too tightly. His jaw set, his pride stinging. You're making a mistake, he said finally, his tone colder now, retreating into the shell of authority he wore so well. No, she replied, her voice steady, almost serene. I'm making a choice, and so did you. Before he could respond, she ended the call. She set the phone face down on the counter, the hum of the city outside her window suddenly louder in the quiet kitchen. The saucepan on the stove had begun to bubble, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling the air. Harper stirred it slowly, the smallest hint of a smile touching her lips. Ethan had made his move, and it had failed. That desperation in his voice told her more than any market report ever could. The cracks weren't just in the company anymore. They were in him. And soon, the break would be complete. It began with a single article on an industry blog, one of those niche sites where insiders whispered behind thinly veiled anonymity. The headline was sharp enough to draw blood. Office betrayal at Pinnacle Dynamics. Insider claims star engineer was pushed out to steal her system. The piece named no names but hinted at everything, citing confidential sources who described a boardroom coup, falsified accusations, and a proprietary system taken from its creator. By mid-morning, the story had been picked up by a mid-tier business news site. This time, it was less subtle. Ethan Cole's name appeared in the second paragraph, alongside Harper's, painting him as the architect of a corporate betrayal that had backfired spectacularly. A grainy photo of them together at last year's shareholder gala. Harper smiling politely, Ethan's hand hovering just above her back, was splashed across the screen. The domino effect was instant. By afternoon, major financial outlets and even mainstream media were covering it. Television anchors repeated phrases like ethics violation and misappropriation of intellectual property. their voices tinged with the kind of controlled outrage that drew viewers in. Social media turned the story viral. Former employees chimed in with vague but damning anecdotes, fueling the narrative. Hashtags emerged, each more scathing than the last. Inside Pinnacle Dynamics, chaos reigned. The PR department scrambled to issue a statement calling the allegations unfounded and defamatory, but it only made things worse. Screenshots of internal emails, supposedly proving Harper's innocence, began circulating online, leaked by someone with direct access to the company's archives. By early evening, every employee's inbox was flooded with inquiries from reporters. Investors stopped calling for updates and started demanding resignations. One particularly aggressive shareholder threatened to initiate a vote to remove Ethan as CEO unless credible damage control was executed within days. In the executive suite, Ethan slammed his office door shut, his phone vibrating nonstop with calls he didn't dare answer. His reflection in the glass window looked older, the usual confident posture eroded. The one thing he had built his career on, his image, was unraveling in real time. Meanwhile, across the city, Harper scrolled through the coverage on her tablet. She was curled on her couch, a mug of tea in hand, the warm lamplight casting soft shadows over her face. She hadn't spoken to a single journalist. She hadn't needed to. Whoever had leaked the story had done it with surgical precision, each detail timed to maximum effect. She suspected she knew who. There were still loyalists inside Pinnacle who'd seen enough to know the truth. She read one headline again, letting the words sink in. From asset to outcast, how Pinnacle Dynamics' power grab cost them their crown jewel. The irony wasn't lost on her. A week ago, Ethan had called her out of desperation. Now his empire was crumbling not just from the inside, but under the full weight of public judgment. That night, the evening news led with footage of Pinnacle's headquarters, employees leaving the building with guarded expressions, a few shielding their faces from cameras. The anchor's voiceover was merciless. Once a darling of the tech industry, Pinnacle Dynamics is now facing mounting scrutiny over allegations of corporate misconduct. Harper closed her tablet and set it aside. She didn't feel the rush of vindication she thought she might. This wasn't over yet. Public humiliation was one thing, complete dismantling was another, and Ethan still had further to fall. Outside, the city buzzed on, but for Ethan Cole, the night was far too quiet, filled only with the sound of a career imploding. The air in the Pinnacle Dynamics boardroom was heavier than it had ever been. The long, polished table that once hosted champagne toasts and strategic victories now bore only stacks of financial reports, investor statements, and the latest grim projections. The blinds were drawn, muting the daylight into a dull gray haze. Ethan Cole sat at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence stripped to something brittle. His tie was absent, the top buttons of his shirt undone. Before him lay a printed chart showing the company's liquidity, a steep, unbroken plunge toward zero. For days, he had been trying to find a way out, to patch the leaks with half-promises and last-minute negotiations. But the numbers didn't lie. Pinnacle Dynamics was weeks away from being insolvent. The board members sat in tense silence until Margaret Voss, the oldest and most influential among them, cleared her throat. "Ethan," she began, her voice sharp, "we have reached the end of our tolerance. You failed to contain the client exodus. Our share price has lost nearly half its value. The media scandal is bleeding us in every direction. The investors are unanimous. Your leadership is no longer viable." Ethan's hands tightened into fists against the table. "This is a temporary downturn," he said, the edge of desperation in his tone. "We can recover." Margaret didn't let him finish. "We could have recovered before the truth about Harper Lewis became public. Before the headlines painted you as a thief. Before the system you claimed to control began collapsing from within." Around the table, No one came to his defense. Gregory Hale avoided eye contact entirely, flipping through papers he'd already read 3 times. Maya Brooks sat with her shoulders hunched, her eyes fixed on the grain of the tabletop. The shame radiating from her was palpable. Weeks of trying to salvage Harper's work had ground her down to exhaustion and guilt. Margaret slid a document toward Ethan. "This is your formal termination as CEO, effective immediately. The vote is unanimous. Sign it." For a moment, he just stared at the paper, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Then, with a jerky motion, he picked up the pen. His signature came out uneven, as if each stroke was a small defeat. When it was done, he pushed the paper back without looking at anyone. Margaret turned her gaze toward Maya. "Given your role in this debacle and the operational chaos under your management, we believe it's in everyone's best interest that you step down as well." Maya nodded once. No argument, no plea, just quiet resignation. She gathered her folder and left the room without looking back. Silence fell again before Margaret spoke the words everyone had been waiting for. "That brings us to the matter of leadership. We need stability. We need someone who understands the system and can restore our credibility." It was Gregory who finally said it out loud. "We need Harper Lewis." A murmur went through the room. Margaret nodded. "She has agreed to meet with us, but understand, she will have terms." Later that afternoon, Harper entered the same boardroom she had been escorted out of months ago. She wore a sleek black suit, her hair pulled back, her expression composed but unreadable. The board members rose slightly in greeting, some offering hesitant smiles. Margaret gestured toward the empty seat at the head of the table. "Harper, we'd like to offer you full operational control of Pinnacle Dynamics, CEO with board support." Harper let the offer hang in the air for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice calm, deliberate. "If I take this role, it will be under my conditions, full creative and technical autonomy over the system, complete authority to restructure the leadership team, and every decision, financial or strategic, comes through me." There was no negotiation, no hedging. They knew they had no leverage. Margaret gave a single, decisive nod. "Agreed." Harper's eyes swept the room, pausing for just a fraction of a second on Ethan's now empty chair. "Then I accept," she said, her tone carrying a quiet finality. In that moment, the company's balance of power shifted entirely. The board had traded one leader for another, but this time, the empire would be built on her terms alone. Harper's first day back at Pinnacle Dynamics began before sunrise. The building's glass facade reflected the pale morning light as she stepped out of a sleek black car, the sound of her heels steady against the marble of the main lobby. There were no security escorts this time, no cardboard boxes of hastily packed belongings, only the quiet nods of the front desk staff, many of whom had avoided eye contact the day she was forced out. Now, their gazes followed her with something else entirely: respect. She walked straight to the executive floor, her new keycard unlocking the frosted glass doors without hesitation. The air felt different. The tension that had hung over the office in recent weeks seemed to lift as employees caught sight of her. Some offered small, relieved smiles. Others, bolder, stopped her in the hall to shake her hand or thank her for coming back. Her first executive order was simple but symbolic: the reinstatement of every loyal employee who had been demoted, sidelined, or pushed out in the fallout of her firing. By mid-morning, familiar faces filled the development wing again. Marcus from analytics, Rachel from her original coding team, even a few quiet, behind-the-scenes engineers who had kept their heads down during Ethan's reign. The hum of focused conversation returned to the workspace like oxygen rushing into a suffocating room. Next came the technical resurrection. Harper and her team worked through the weekend to purge the corrupted adjustments that had been clumsily implemented in her absence. She moved through the code with the ease of someone who knew it intimately, her fingers flying across the keyboard, removing patchwork fixes, restoring the original logic, and reinforcing the hidden frameworks that kept the system operating at peak efficiency. By Monday morning, reports that had taken hours to generate were appearing in seconds. Data mismatches vanished. Client dashboards, once sluggish, responded instantly. The change was felt immediately by the outside world. Clients who had been on the verge of leaving called to renegotiate contracts. New inquiries began arriving, cautious at first, then steadily growing as the news spread. Pinnacle Dynamics was back, and so was the architect of its success. The stock price began to inch upward, then surged as investor confidence returned. Harper kept her office door open, a stark contrast to Ethan's fortress-like approach to leadership. She walked the floors daily, speaking directly to employees, asking for input, and making quick, decisive changes based on their feedback. She rebuilt not just the company's infrastructure, but its culture, replacing the climate of fear with one of shared purpose. On the third week of her leadership, she stood at the head of the same boardroom table where Ethan had once sat, addressing the entire company via live stream. "We succeed together or we fail together," she told them. "The system works because it was built on trust. Trust between every person in this building and every client we serve. That's how we'll lead from now on." The applause that followed wasn't just polite. It was genuine, sustained, and alive with hope. Far from the city center, in a quiet cafe tucked between aging brick buildings, Ethan Cole sat alone by the window, a newspaper folded on the table in front of him. The business section carried a headline he couldn't ignore: "Pinnacle Dynamics surges under return of visionary CEO Harper Lewis." A photograph showed her standing before the company, smiling with quiet confidence, the room full of attentive employees. He read the article twice, each sentence driving the reality deeper. The company was thriving without him. More than that, it was thriving because of her. Around him, life went on as usual. Cups clinked, conversations buzzed, the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air. Yet for Ethan, the world felt smaller, reduced to the bitter taste of his own exile. Back in the gleaming tower, Harper sat in her office, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Her system was running flawlessly again, each line of code exactly where it belonged. She knew the stability wasn't magic. It was the product of understanding, of creation, of ownership. Without her, it would have remained broken. She glanced at the framed photo on her desk, taken years ago on the night the system launched, her team laughing, eyes bright with possibility. It was a reminder of what she had built, lost, and reclaimed. And this time, she wasn't just an asset. She was the pinnacle.